الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Pulled out the splendid tissue just to clean the lens. Not sure if you could visibly see it as clear, and prepare for the future. Anyway, that's that bit done. Let's get through some questions and answers that we have had for some time, and I'm going to go through them first. I was sent plenty, mashallah, by one particular brother. So let's go through those questions. Where are we? Okay. Number one, once I fulfill my zakat obligation by giving to a legitimate charity, is there a specific time frame within which the charity is obligated to utilize those funds? So obviously we've done our research. We've determined a particular charity that we feel is going to be the most appropriate for us to donate our funds to. Now, you would have to look at the charity's policies with regards to funds. What are its policies with regards to funds? Do they aim to distribute the funds within 1 lunar year? Do they aim to distribute funds within 3 months, 6 months? So this is, again, part of your due diligence, ensuring what is it and how that charity is going to distribute. One shouldn't just give to a charity and just say, khalas, I'm done, because it's not done. You need to find out basically all those details beforehand. So the question then comes is that there is no obligation on the charity. Rather, the obligation is on the individual to make sure that the charity has sound policies as to when it's going to distribute the funds. Now, when it comes to sadaqah and lillah, then there's no time frame on sadaqah or lillah. Meaning a person can give that. Obviously, once you've given that, the charity shouldn't really be holding on to it. So really the charity, as soon as it receives it, as soon as is operationally possible, should be getting the money across to those people, because it's no longer, it's never been the charity's money. It's no longer the person's money, because the person has given the money. So he has given up ownership of it. The charity never takes ownership of it. The charity is just acting as an agent to distribute. So as soon as the charity receives it, it should be distributing. So there should be no delay apart from what is operationally valid. The time it takes to transfer money and get that project done. Really, that can take, weeks maximum. Shouldn't take anything longer than that. When it comes to zakat, then the zakat that a charity collects, it should be distributed within that lunar year. It is, again, preferable to give the zakat to its due individuals, yani the recipients of zakat, as soon as possible. Because again, why is the charity holding on to the money? The zakat belongs, as soon as it left the ownership of the giver of zakat, should be immediately transferred into the ownership of the correct recipient. The charity, again, is only serving a function. If I choose to pay my zakat in advance of the zakat due date, are the funds required to be spent before the actual zakat due date arrives, before I deduct it from the zakat owed? Once you have given your zakat and it is in advance of your zakat date, then that amount of zakat is given. Okay, that's how you must assume. Again, it depends on the charity's policies. So, it will only be truly given when the recipient receives it, because the charity is, in essence, an extension of the giver of zakat. The charity is only an agent. So the agent is acting on behalf of the person who has made the charity its agent. So therefore, we have to think of the charity as an extension of the giver of zakat. It's just an extension of him. So like, for example, a solicitor in a courtroom will act on behalf of the client, because the client can't speak, especially if the client is the one that is under scrutiny. And therefore, anything he says can incriminate him. So the last thing he wants to be doing is making statements in a courtroom. So the solicitor acts on his behalf. So therefore, what the solicitor says is as though the client is saying that. So the solicitor will say, we this, we that, we this, we that, and suggesting. So therefore, in the same way, when the charity receives the money, it is acting as an extension of the client. So once a person has given zakat and he is confident that zakat has now been received by the recipient, then in his head or in her head, that zakat has been given, even if it is before the due date. On the due date, he or she will now calculate their zakat, because it may be that they gave too little. Suddenly they had a windfall and they sold their car and received another £5,000 in their bank account, for instance. Or it could be that they expected to make a windfall because they thought that they would receive a bonus at the end of the year, and they didn't receive the bonus at the end of the year, but they had calculated their zakat accordingly. So in that case, obviously, they've given over. That's not a problem, giving over, because you can transfer that onto the following year. When I donate zakat to a qualified charity, does that automatically make the charity my wakil for the distribution of these funds according to Islamic guidelines? And it's not needed to ask if that money has been spent on a regular basis. Yes, once you have selected a zakat and you've done your due diligence to make sure that zakat the charity is valid. And remember that if, for instance, another thing to look for a charity is, I've just been outside, I've noticed my beard is very wind-spent. It's had wind in it, mashallah. So there's a lot of air and bounce in my beard, alhamdulillah. So I just noticed it whilst I looked at the screen. I thought, okay, that's looking rather strangely shaped in terms of the distribution of my hairs, but I think that's a little bit better. I need to have makeup before I come on, just so that I'm all appropriately attired and appropriately haired before I start. So once you've done your due diligence, another thing about a charity is to see who is giving Sharia guidance to that charity. Because if a charity is not receiving Sharia guidance, then how are they deciding their policies are Sharia compliant? How are they deciding that things are correct? How are they doing that? If they're just a bunch of guys who are coming together with good hearts, good intentions, but they've got no ilm there, and they've got nobody auditing them, they've got nobody checking them, they've not got nobody verifying them, they've got nobody putting their policies together. How then can you be certain that your zakat is going? And it's like going into a masjid, and so any Tom, Dick, and Harry stands on the musalla and leads in salah. We're very particular about who stands on the musalla in front of us that leads our prayer, because we know our prayer is associated with our imam. And therefore, we want to make sure that the imam is on case as well and is in a sound place. So therefore, when we're actually giving zakat, make sure that the charity has got reputable alim or ulama on its board that are not just putting the policy together, but are actually auditing that charity and holding it to account. And that means, obviously, that scholar must be a senior scholar, because it's very difficult for a young junior scholar to hold a charity to account, especially if the board members are older than him, more senior to him. How is he going to do that? He doesn't necessarily have the reputation. Yes, they become the wakil for those funds, and it's not needed to ask if that money has been spent on a regular basis. Well, until that person, when somebody is made a wakil, the wakil acts on the instructions of the one who has made that person a wakil, the muwakkil. They should act on his instruction. They should not act against his interests. The wakil should act according to his interests. So therefore, if a person gives some money to gives some zakat, say, to a charity, they must say, I want this spent within 3 months in this particular area. This is the one who has made the charity wakil. The charity doesn't decide. Okay, there is the individual that makes that decision. As far as I understand, neither spouse is entitled to the other's assets after a divorce. If a wife chooses to stay home and raise children, she wouldn't receive any income for her efforts. In the event of a divorce, wouldn't she be left with nothing despite her unpaid contributions? How is her and her children's financial security ensured in such a situation? Very interesting question, and it is something which unfortunately we don't touch upon. It is correct, the basis of this question, that neither spouse is entitled to the other spouse's assets after divorce from a Sharia perspective. What the husband has earned is his, and what the wife has earned is hers. Okay, So therefore, when a man divorces his wife, or when a husband and wife divorce, then the man can't say to his wife that, oh, you know what, I want half of what you own. And she can't turn around and say to him that I want half of what you earn. So the question which arises is that she wouldn't receive any income for her efforts. Now, that matter is a little bit confusing, because when the two entered the relationship, then the husband is providing for his wife for as long as she stays his wife. So she doesn't have to work a single day. She has a house to live in. She has, remember, let's just again give this little basis that this is when Muslims are living according to Sharia. Okay. Unfortunately, the great majority of Muslims do not live according to the Sharia. They cherry pick the Sharia when it suits them. So the husband will cherry pick the Sharia when he wants to make a case against his wife, and his wife will cherry pick the Sharia when she wants to make a case against her husband. People don't enter wholesome into the deen, into Sharia, that they say, you know what, Islam is going to be our guiding principles. We are going, because the first thing is that they would both have to be ulama. And if they're not ulama, then they would have to literally, every single point of their life, they would have to engage with the ulama to ask them questions. And majority of people do not do that. They do not engage with the ulama when they're requesting questions. So really, when the two people should be knowledgeable before they get married, that what are we getting married for? What's the basis of this marriage? And once that's been sorted, then the agreement is that the husband now provides for his wife. This is, like I said, according to Sharia principles, which, unfortunately, like I said again, most people don't live according to. So once he does that, so in that case, he's providing. So she doesn't have to pay rent. She doesn't have to pay a mortgage. She doesn't have to buy a house. She doesn't have to buy the food. She doesn't have to buy her own clothing. She doesn't have to buy the children's clothing. She doesn't have to buy the children's. When I say she doesn't have to buy, I mean she doesn't have to pay for it. She might still buy it. She doesn't have to pay for the children's food. She doesn't have to pay for the children's clothing. She doesn't have to pay for anything. The husband is responsible from a Sharia perspective for all of that. Okay, for all of that. So therefore, what efforts is she wanting to be recompensed for now? Because she's getting all this for free. So arguably, it could be said that, I don't know, it cost 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 pounds a year to look after a person, clothe them, feed them, house them, whatever. And the husband is doing that for his wife for 20 years. So let's just say it's, I don't know, 15,000. So 15,000 over 20 years is 300 grand. So over 20 years, he has provided 300 grand's worth of provision for his wife. And she's not had to do anything whatsoever in exchange. So that is the so-called income for her efforts. Okay. In the event of a divorce, if a divorce does take place, she wouldn't be left with nothing? She would be left with nothing because she's not worked. And she's not worked because she's wanted her husband to provide for her. And that's what he's done. So because she's not worked, and he's provided for her, what is she expecting to get now as a result of that? Her financial security of her children is that the husband will still provide for the children even if he separates from his wife. Now, again, this is based upon who takes responsibility for the upbringing of the children. At a young age, up to around 7, the mother would have responsibility because the nurturing is pretty much the mother's role. And then post 7, the father would have that responsibility. But when it comes to financial, the father will continue to financially support his children, irrespective of where the children are. That is his responsibility. So the children's security is there. Once they reach bulugh, or in the case of 18, in the UK, then as a result, they will no longer need to be supported by him, and they will support themselves like everybody does. Whether they go to university, whether they get an apprenticeship, or whether they get a job. She can remarry after she's divorced from her husband and have another man support her, or she can now get a job because she's been supported by her husband for the last 20 years. So it's not as though she's losing out. I think the problem is that because we become very work-orientated, money-orientated from that perspective, we feel that everything we do, we need a financial contribution for. Bear in mind, obviously, that the husband has ensured that he's provided a house for her, he's provided food for her, He's provided clothing for her, all for that time period, and whereas she's been raising her own children, so to speak. How is tabarruj defined in Islam? Does its meaning depend on the cultural norms of a particular society? So tabarruj is, you could say that it has impacts on a particular society, whereby some societies could see certain acts as tabarruj and other societies not. However, I would say that generally speaking, tabarruj is quite clear in terms of how a woman is engaging in that behavior, where she is dressing in a certain way, her behavior is in a certain way, as she is, remember, from a traditional Islam perspective, and this is why we get a lot of these, and I use that phrase, we get a lot of these issues now, because many people are comparing Islam to liberal societies. And when they look at liberal societies, they say, well, Islam is not, doesn't give much rights to women. It doesn't allow women to do certain things. Well, yes, that's because traditional Islam is not like a free liberal society. A free liberal society is only something that's come about in the last sort of 50, 60 years as such. And even then, you'll find women who will complain that it's not actually totally free, because you see the Me Too movement that took place recently, where women have been exploited. Now, obviously, you've got other platforms, of a certain nature that's exploiting women. So you're seeing that, this kind of utopian state of women being, and women know that as well. They use what their physicality to their advantage in certain cases. Not all women, obviously, we're generalizing here. So therefore, obviously, you've got that situation that exists, and that's a reality. For anyone to deny the reality of that is somewhat deluded. That is a reality that exists. Just because folk don't want to kind of sort of speak about the elephant in the room, it's a fact, and therefore, that's always going to be the case. And Islam's job is as to minimize the interaction between the two genders. That's its job. That's what it seeks out to do. It minimizes that. So the question comes, well, why are men going out, and why can't women go out then? Well, the simple thing is because men have been given the responsibility to be the breadwinner, to earn. Now, nowadays, obviously, everybody works from home. Even those who don't work from home, if you know what I mean. So now, it's a different thing. Everybody works from home. But back in the day, you only got work when you went outside the house. There's no way you're going to sit at home with a laptop or something and earn money. You had to earn money by being a farmer or a tradesman or whatever, or some kind of skill that you had. So one of the two genders needed to leave the house. Okay. And we've just talked now that one of the two genders needs to raise the children. So it became quite simple to decide that, one, because the women are the ones who bear the children. So therefore, biologically, there was already an argument made for the woman to stay and the man to leave the home. So now that the male gender is out, now you do not want to have the female gender out. Otherwise, you're going to get these interactions, and that's going to lead to certain things. And that answers that. So no, tabarruj wouldn't necessarily change from society to society. It has broad principles, which is talking about dressing in a manner. And we know the kind of things where it's, bright colors, tight fitting clothes. We know the circumstances, and it doesn't need to be sort of spelled out as to what this is in reference to. Do brothers have any degree of authority over their sisters once both are baligh? Are the sisters required to obey their brothers in the same way they are expected to obey their father? Not necessarily so. What tends to happen, obviously, the father's duty is over his children, especially if we're in reference here to young girls. That is the father's duty, to make sure that their daughter, she's been, she has had the right tarbiyah. Since these are all female-oriented questions, hence the reason my answer is always like she. So he makes sure that the children are of a certain, tarbiyah, that they're being protected, their chastity is being protected, that when her hand is being asked for in marriage, it's being done in an appropriate, respectful way, not in a disrespectful way. So that's the father's responsibility. For him to be captain of the ship, for him to be able to lead his family, he has to have authority. he has to be respected by his family members. Otherwise, it's very difficult. Like let's just give a football analogy. If nobody respects the manager, and the manager does not have power over his players, that he can drop certain players and pick certain players, then there will be anarchy. So the manager has authority, is being given authority by the club to be able to decide who he drops and who he selects in order to express authority. So in the same way, the father has that authority. If there's an absence of a father, meaning the father is dead, okay, or it's an absent father, he unfortunately does not take his responsibility seriously and he leaves the family. In those circumstances, yes, a senior brother, he may play the role of leading and establishing authority in the absence of his father. But in the presence of his father, he doesn't necessarily have authority as such over his sisters anymore. All he can give is give nasiha. He can give advice, which any member can give to another sibling. That's what they can do. Obviously, the seniority that has the sibling, then the more authority he has in that sense. So, an elder brother will have more respect and authority because he's an older brother compared to a younger one. However, if the younger one, mashallah, is speaking sense from a dini perspective, from a sound way, then obviously his authority, even though he's the youngest one, he should be respected because what he's saying is haqq. He's not saying something which is wrong. So I hope that tackles that one. I'm just going to pick this question up. Assalamu alaikum, Mufti. My friend is trying to marry a woman. However, he's delaying it because he's afraid her parents will not agree, or his parents. It says bus parents, so I'm not sure what that means. However, he's texting this woman. How do I tell him that this is wrong? I think quite simply, his parents. Okay, quite simply, you just tell him this is wrong. That's it. There's no other way to put it there. Then this is decision. Remember, many people do things because they don't have ilm. Okay, so one has to just explain to a person this is wrong. One cannot force a person to do something. One can only say this is wrong, brother. Now he does it. He cannot argue ignorance. When it comes to positions of authority, like we're just discussing here, like a father, then the father can actually change the circumstances because he is the father. So, for example, if he finds that his children are staying up late because they're watching TV or they're watching inappropriate material on TV, then the father can decide, I'm going to take the TV away from you. I'm going to take the remote away from you. Or nowadays, obviously, more usual is the phone, that they're using the phone inappropriately, going on to things which is not good. Now, because they're living in the father's house and the father has authority, he can take that away from the child and say, look, this is wrong. I'm taking this away from you. Now, the child might think, oh, that's not fair. I want to commit sin and he's stopping me from committing sin. But I guess if you analyze it just like the way I said it, father's doing a good thing for that person. He's not doing a bad thing. Okay, yes, it might seem in the short term that they wanted instant gratification and they're not being allowed that instant gratification because the father is saying, look, dismiss your instant gratification, rather get gratification further down the road, which is going to be purer, which is going to be longer because it's eternal and it's going to be pleasing to your Lord, rather than something which you get a little bit of a high off, a little bit of an endorphin rush, and then that dissipates quite quickly. And then the next day you're searching it again, or the next hour you're searching it again. Whereas the one that you will get in exchange of this is eternal. How does Islam view involuntary thoughts or intrusive thoughts in relation to sin? These are literally, as you've explained them, involuntary. Involuntary meaning you have not set out to have those thoughts. They are what we refer to as the waswasat, yani the whisperings. And these can be internal whisperings from the qarina, or these could be external whisperings from the shayateen. And that's all they are. And sometimes it can be a test as well. And all it is that you dismiss them. You do not let them ponder in your mind for too long. You do not start reflecting over them. You do not start to conspire and plan of how you could potentially fulfill that request, that thought. You dismiss it as soon as you get it. We've been taught, obviously, you say that a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, and you dismiss it immediately. You do not hold on to it for too long. But that's all they are. They're involuntary. They're intrusive. They're not things which you are thinking of. And you've got to just dismiss them. Try not to give them too much time and attention. What are the limits of obedience to parents in Islam, especially when personal well-being is at risk? Yeah, there's never we have a very simplistic approach to absolutism in our deen. So we hear a hadith that we say, oh, one should respect one's parents. So then we take that and say that's an absolutism. They only 100% of the time we should respect our parents. Well, not really. And I'll tell you why not really. What if your parent tells you to do haram? So now you shouldn't listen to your parents. So there's an exception there. What if your parent is committing something wrong in your presence? That's another one. How can you respect your parents? What if your parent has abused you physically or sexually as a child? How can you respect that parent? So there are many factors, few, generally speaking. So when we see these ahadith, they're not absolutes, they're generalizations. So generally speaking, one should respect one's parents. Why? Because obviously of what they've been through to bring you to this earth and raise you, and also for that hierarchical structure. In order to maintain, remember, every time a child is born, every time a new generation comes, they think they know more than their parents. Okay, even though they don't know more than their parents, they think they do. So if one respects one's parents, then that person will always be going for mashwara to their parents. They'll always be saying to their parents, what do you think in these circumstances? What should I do in these circumstances? What's your view in these circumstances? And the parent would actually disclose and say, well, what you should do here is like this, or you should do this, or you should do that. And they let them share their opinions with you. And you don't have to necessarily act on those opinions, but at least you've heard somebody with X number of years of experience who's been there, seen it, and done it. And therefore you are learning a lot from them, and it's free advice. It's nothing to lose. So yes, we should avoid absolutism on points. And what it is we should, again, like we know, for example, that the wife should show respect towards the husband. The husband should show love towards the wife. The elders should show mercy towards the young. The young should show love to respect towards the elders. There's so many phrases like this, of this nature, that we can extract from the Quran and Ahadith that are not absolutes. They are generalizations, so that there is a structure, but then there are always exceptions to the rule. Once you have a structure, an nizam, then you can make exceptions. Okay, you can make exceptions to that. Does Islam recognize the concept of consent and marital rape? If not, would a wife seeking divorce on such grounds be considered amongst those deprived of the fragrance of Jannah? Subhanallah. So again, let's go back to the point of marriage. And again, this is something which is not understood, because hardly anybody understands what nikah is. Hardly anybody understands. Unfortunately, we only see it from the physical act, that this permits me to commit certain physical acts with this person. It allows me to be alone with this person. It allows me to have children with this person. And that's all that people see. They fail to realize that it's actually a contract. Okay, it's a contract. And unfortunately, because we're usually quite naive, or we are not informed, and we don't seek to have an informed understanding of marriage, and we kind of get all romanticized and get all giddy, we tend not to know what nikah is. Nikah is a contractual obligation between two parties. In that contractual obligation, the wife agrees to make herself physically available to her husband in that contractual obligation. That's what when she says yes, yani when she says, when her father comes and requests from her, or when the imam requests from her, or when anybody requests from her, her uncle or brother, and she says, yes, I give permission to be married to this man, that's what she's saying yes to. Okay? That is what she's saying yes to. And similarly, when he says yes, he's also saying yes to, I will provide for her, I will provide food for her, I will protect her, and all these things. In fact, within the Christian faith, you actually hear the bride and the groom taking their vows, as it's referred to. So it is actually articulated what they are doing for each other. In Islam, unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately, because we don't learn before marriage, and because the process is done usually in the absence of the woman, then there is no awareness of what vows these two people have made to each other. So it is important. People are always rushing to get married, mashallah. They should get married, alhamdulillah. It is a sunnah to be fulfilled. But know what you are getting yourself into from a contractual basis. Forget from a emotional basis. Forget from a physical basis. Forget from anywhere else. From a contractual basis, what have you just agreed to? So therefore, hence the reason why the concept of marital rape is somewhat alien to that understanding. And this was also the case in all traditional religions, even within Christianity. It did not exist, this concept, because it was something which was acceptable, that once a wife had agreed to marry a husband, then this is what happens. Okay. Now, fast forward, and in the UK, for instance, and in other countries, it is considered that even if two people are married, or now even marriage is not an institution, so two people who are cohabiting together, one cannot force themselves on the other. Consent needs to be sought. And this wasn't a thing about consent once the person was married. Consent was only a thing. Obviously, it doesn't even exist in Islam, but it exists. People who don't follow religion, that when they when they have even now intimacy with one another, that they must make sure that there's consent, because otherwise it's considered as rape. That if a man does not take consent from a woman and engages in intimacy with her, that is rape. Okay, because she did not give consent, and it needs to be clear that she is giving consent. And if she refuses, then that's a refusal. What's happened now? That's also come into married couples. Right? This never existed before. And therefore now consent needs to be sought. And as you know, without going into too much detail, because I don't know who listens to these videos, we might be younger people. How often does a husband or wife take consent from one another when they are together? They just don't, because it's the kind of thing you do, even when they're sort of moving around each other in the house, and they want to make physical contact. They don't seek consent. They just engage because they're husband and wife. It's just like a norm. So that's why this is why you get this position where, like, okay, where does Islam stand on these things? Hence the reason why. But we live in the world that we live in now, and obviously those of Muslims who live in the West need to take that into consideration. They need to take that into consideration, that I do need to be careful that if my wife is not keen to engage in certain behavior, that I should refrain from it. Okay. And if he feels that this, his wife is always feeling like that, and he has issues, that physical needs that need to be met, then he should look to marry again, nikah, obviously. And if that's not working well for him, then he should maybe divorce the wife and marry somebody else. What he shouldn't do is put himself into a situation potentially that's going to get him arrested and do something to this woman if she's not pleased to go ahead with that. And from a woman's perspective, she needs to understand what nikah means. That once I have said yes to this, then this is a contractual obligation that I've just signed up to. I'm a grown adult. I've agreed to the terms of this contract, and that's what the terms of this contract are. Okay? So I hope that's made some clarity around that topic. What are the limits of ghiba on exposing sins when seeking advice about someone's behavior or actions? Generally speaking, one doesn't need to disclose names when seeking advice. Okay. One doesn't need to disclose names. They can just say, there's this person at work, and what they do is they do this and they do this, and it's really annoying me and it's really frustrating. It's only when you're taking your ishkal, you're taking your complaint to an amir. So if it's in the house, you're taking your complaint to the father, okay, and he's the amir of the house. Or if it's a wife who's got issues with her children, then she's taking her complaint to her husband, who is the amir. And she may have to now disclose and say, my son, so-and-so, he does this or he does that. Now, obviously, this is riba, because she's speaking about her son behind his back with something that he would not be happy for it to be disclosed, even though it may be truthful. So now this comes under riba, and this is obviously the consumption of the person's back. So in this case, what she would do is she would disclose that person's name, and there's no issue with that, because obviously this is a reason for it. Similarly, when somebody is seeking your mashwara, so for example, a man is going to get his son married to a particular girl, and he wants to find out a little bit more about this girl. So he asks some people in the masjid about her father, about the family generally. And one person comes and he mentions things about the family which are bad. Now, this is riba. But if he does not disclose that, then the issue that they're going to have is that they're not going to know the details, and he's going to enter into this relationship without ascertaining all the truth. So again, there is no issue there with disclosing that. So there are limits. Again, like I said to you with a message earlier, that we have to a question earlier, that we have to avoid absolutism. That everything is absolute. It's a generalization. These are all generalizations with exceptions. When it comes to exposing sins, then that's only if you're talking to somebody who is doing your islah. Yani he is improving and rectifying your behavior and trying to improve your soul. That's their job. So there you may need to disclose certain sins, that I have a habit of doing this. I have a habit of losing my temper. I smoke, or I do this, or I do that. So you're disclosing a sin here. Okay. And as you disclose a sin here, now this person, obviously, he is going to give you some advice of how you can improve yourself. So there is, again, when there is a need to expose one's sins, then it's permissible. If there is no need, then one should keep it quiet. It's on a need to know basis. Is it permissible to delay Hajj if you have the means for financial stability or family responsibilities, or till you feel prepared for it? No, one shouldn't delay Hajj for financial stability stake, which I'm assuming means beyond the amount of money you need for Hajj, or family responsibilities, or anything else for that matter. That's like saying, can I delay Isha Salah because I got to cook supper for the kids to come back from madrasa. And when I mean delay, I mean making it qada. Can I, delay fasting? I don't want to keep them in Ramadan. I'll keep them, 6 months later. Can I do that? No. When something becomes fard, when a ritual act of worship becomes fard, then we should hasten to do it as fast as possible. There is no sin on a person if they were to delay Hajj. Okay, but there are, from a Hanafi perspective, but from the other school's perspective, they do see it as seriously problematic. And there's a warning given as well by the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith, in which he says that, then you may as well abandon your faith, or words to that effect. So therefore, one shouldn't take this lightly and put everything as a priority in front of one's Hajj. Does talaq tafweed give a woman the same authority as the man to initiate divorce, or are there specific conditions and limitations? It depends how that talaq tafweed has been given. If it is being given generally, and absolutely, then there are no conditions or limitations. If it is given by stipulating time, either verbally or by the context of the environment, then that limitation applies. So really, it is a statement, and statements can be specified, and they can be made conditioned. Okay, so they can both be specified and conditioned. So it depends when the husband, because it's the husband transferring. Tafweed means to transfer. So he's transferring the capacity, okay, to be able to issue divorce to his wife. Once he does that, then yes, she can issue that divorce. But it depends, obviously, if he's associated any conditions to that, if he's associated any statements of that, or he's giving this as mutlaq. Yani, and then we start going into linguistics. Okay, and when we're going to linguistics, we start analyzing how he said it, the manner in which he said it, the context in which he said it, and these things would come in. How should a Muslim approach the concept of wealth and material success, and how can one avoid the attachment to worldly possessions while still fulfilling financial responsibilities? So wealth and material success, we sometimes deem that to be a bad thing. It is not a bad thing. It becomes bad when it is the love of that. That's when it becomes bad. Wealth itself and material success itself is just possession. However, we've seen that generally speaking, again, a generalization, that those people who have more possessions and have more wealth and have more material status are unfortunately tested more and slip more than those who don't. Generalization. However, they are equal. There's a hadith which mentions that a grateful eating person is equivalent to a patient fasting person. So in one case, the person doesn't have any food, but he's patient. And in the other case, the person has food and he's eating and he's grateful. They are equal. So it is the reaction from the person which is the test. So in the case of the person who has plenty of, material assets, that person, for instance, he is being grateful. So he gets ajr. The other person who is living in constrained circumstances, he remains patient. So he's rewarded. What tends to happen is when we have plenty, we tend to forget Allah. And when we have less, we tend to remember Allah, that because we're asking Him for things, because we need things. So if we need His help for our children to become successful, if we need His help for us to bear children, if we need His help in having food or having a house, then we will turn to Allah. But if we have a house, if we have food, if we have our children are doing well, if we've got children, then we don't ask Allah. So we become satisfied. And when you become satisfied, you stop becoming grateful. Hence the reason why you find that as a general situation, the ulama tend to favor being in a state of need over being in a state of content. For that very reason, because of the psychological impact it has on people in terms of turning to Allah. However, in reality, there is no difference between the two. And some would argue that having material assets makes the believer stronger. And a stronger believer is far better than a weak believer, because a weak believer becomes dependent upon society, whereas a strong believer is the one that gives. And the hadith is clear, yadul ulya khairum min yadis sufla, that the giving hand, the upper hand, is superior than the lower hand, the receiving hand, and many, many narrations of that nature. So therefore, there is nothing wrong with material assets. It's just if we make our life based on accumulating them. If that's what becomes the purpose to our life, then we become Abdul Dinar and Abdul Dirham, where all we're thinking about is how can I make more money? How am I going to get more money? More money, more money, more money, more money. And we don't care where it comes from, how we get it. We give 2 minutes to recite in the Quran, and we give 20 hours to trying to make money. Try to make money, 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 money. Now, that is skewed. That is an imbalance. Okay. A man has to work. Okay. He works 6, 7 hours. That's normally the going rate, 7 hours, 7.5 hours a day. So he does that. But then at least to balance that, do 3 hours of ibadah, because you're going to sleep for 7, 8 hours. So life is not just about working and sleeping, that you're going to spend 7, 8 hours working, 7, 8 hours sleeping. So that's 16 hours gone. You've got 8 hours left. In that 8 hours, you're just spending on relaxing or chilling out or whatever. So so you're going to do that, then you're living, you're surviving, but you're not actually using the life for anything. The life is supposed to be preparing your akhirah. You can't prepare your akhirah by trying to make money. Again, if you're fulfilling a fard, then working is fulfilling that fard. So you get ajr for that. But one shouldn't make their life solely about earning. But to balance that, as I've done earlier, there is nothing wrong in wealth or material success. There is nothing wrong in it inherently. Okay, this is just a misconception that people think that this is inherently wrong. No, it is what is associated with it that's problematic, and I've explained in great detail those specifics, so you can watch that over again, inshallah. Would it be permissible to intentionally keep a large sum of money from the sale of a house in a savings account for an estimated 6 to 12 months and donate the accrued interest to charity or those in need. Would accepting money from interest negatively affect the recipients in any way? If someone had a large sum of money and they didn't have any use for it right now, and they didn't want to invest it, they wanted to keep it because they needed it sooner or later, and obviously they didn't want to put it under the floorboards or under the mattress, so they put it in a bank account for safekeeping. This seems to suggest from the question that they're trying to generate money from this account, from this money. Hence the reason of putting in a savings account. One shouldn't think of generating money with this money. If a person is putting it in a bank for safekeeping, then there's permissibility. But one shouldn't be putting in a savings account knowing that I'm going to get more interest and I'll use that interest. No, you can't transact in interest, and this is transacting in interest. Okay. So one can put money in a bank account for safekeeping. That's absolutely fine. But one can't go for a higher interest savings account thinking I'll park it in there, and what will happen is I will get more return from this, and as I get more return from this, I'll be able to use that money in the path of Allah. Wrong. Okay, wrong. If you're going to keep this money over a long period of time, then it's best investing it. We are being told time and time again that we shouldn't hoard money. Okay, we should invest it. That's what we should do, right? So that's the first thing. If a person doesn't want to invest it because they want to keep it just in case they need it for something, then in those circumstances, they should put it into an account which gives them the minimum interest. Why? Because we don't transact in interest. So we minimize the problem. We don't maximize the problem. That wouldn't make sense. Then when we take the money out, any interest it has generated, we can throw that away. And when we throw it away to the poor. Okay, that's basically, because to us it's filth, to the poor they can accept it. It will negatively affect the person's money if this person is actually planning to make more interest. That's wrong. You cannot plan to make more interest. You cannot transact to make more interest. You have to transact to minimize the interest, not maximize it. Walaikum salam. Does the Olive Lantern Trust website still exist? It absolutely does, Hamza. You can quite easily go to the internet, olivelanterntrust.com, and you'll find it. Please do so whilst you're still online, and then you can put on the chat and say, yes, it's there. It'll take you a split second, young man. Is a brother-in-law's son from a previous... It's not working. Oh, that's interesting. It could... I'll check that. It should be working. I don't understand why it's not working. I'll check that. It might be your... check on another device, Hamza, or somebody else, whoever's watching, if they could check it, please. Is a brother-in-law's son from a previous marriage considered mahram to his second wife's sisters? I think I need a family tree to understand this. So a brother-in-law. So a brother-in-law is sister's husband. So sister's husband, son from a previous marriage. No, because the brother-in-law is not mahram. Okay. So no, it's not mahram. Assuming I've drawn the family tree correctly in my head. Is there a concept of adolescence in Islam? Or is a person considered either a child or baligh? If adolescence isn't recognized, are individuals held fully accountable for their actions regardless of age or life experience? I came across an article a few weeks ago discussing a relationship between a 14-year-old and a 22-year-old, which would be classified as statutory rape under the modern legal system, since the 14-year-old is legally a minor. In Islamic law, if the 14-year-old is considered baligh, how is accountability addressed in such a situation, given the clear ethical concerns surrounding consent and exploitation? Yes, this would be something that we would, you see, again, these are hypotheticals, okay? The reason why I say this is hypothetical, because a 14-year-old engaging in a 22-year-old would be illegal in this country, and therefore, as you've rightly said, would be considered against the law, and therefore nothing that could be condoned, and the law would take its steps. So the question becomes a hypothetical scenario. As a hypothetical scenario, you cannot give an answer to that as such. The only way one could answer it is that if we were living in a Sharia system where everything was sound and everything was good and everything was, proper, and people had been raised on this system and understood this system, and this system had flourished for decades, then that answer would be slightly different. in terms of how that would work and what systems that would be put into place. Again, most likely what would happen is potentially there could be exploitation, absolutely, because now the world is changing when it comes to accessibility to inappropriate material. Back in the day, you would find that the accessibility to inappropriate, observing the intimacy between a man and a woman was virtually impossible to see, because there was always that respect and dignity, and about rarely husbands and wives would even show any affection of love in front of their children, never mind engaging in that sort of behavior. Now, unfortunately, young 6, 7, 8-year-olds are being exposed to that type of material. So it's a very sexualized world now compared to the world 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. So it is a very different, and context plays a key part. It absolutely does play a key part. So therefore, this would be a huge conversation, and we can't make these kind of hypotheticals anymore, and we shouldn't be, because it is very misunderstood. And when we try to kind of give these black and white scenarios, it confuses us. It confuses us. So what needs to happen is there's a whole conversation that needs to go around here. But simply said, in present day and age, especially here as in the UK, that would be considered as illegal. In a country where consent and marriageable age is 14, then it wouldn't be considered as illegal. So one would have to go by whatever the law is within that country and accept those terms within that country, because when a person decides to be a citizen of that country, then the person accepts the laws of that country. If the person doesn't like the laws of that country, then they shouldn't live there, because they'll say, well, I don't like your laws. Well, fine. One can, lobby to change those laws, but that could take a long time for the lobbying to take place in order to that happen. But, I would say the times we're living in now and the way people are, you'd see a lot of exploitation in this manner, which would be seen as inappropriate. And therefore, it'd be something that one would advise against. Remember, just because, and this is the last point I'd make before we finish, mashallah, we've had a nearly full allotment, is that just because something is permissible doesn't necessarily mean that's something that we should always advocate. This is another thing that we need to understand. This permissibility is because the Sharia is till the end of time. And because of the Sharia is till the end of time, it is legitimizing all forms of scenarios. Okay? So that if ever some scenario came across the people, they would have a legitimate way around it. Now, for example, now, polygamy is frowned upon in certain societies, which is strange, because men and women are having lots of relationships with different men and women and same gender now, and where they might only be married to one, just to avoid the polygamy rule. But in essence, they are being polygamous because they're having numerous relations. Young people growing up, and it's not that it's unheard of. Young people growing up may have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 relationships on the go, or move from one person to the other. Okay. DNS probe finished. What does that even mean? Okay. I think that's from the website. That's interesting. What does that mean then, Usman? Because I'm gonna forget what that means. So people are living in polygamous relationships, but the Sharia does permit those. But it might be that society now considers it a taboo. But it might come a time when there is, or it might come, there might be a geographical location where the number of women compared to the number of men far exceeds them. Now, if you did not have this ability for a man to marry 4 women, then you would have a situation on your hands there. You would have a sizable members of the community not being able to fulfill their needs. And therefore, you're going to get scenarios of same gender relationships or other things that might happen as a result of that. So always bear in mind that the Sharia is quite broad for obvious reasons, because to take into surroundings and circumstances that may happen either in a different geographical location or in a different time. And because Islam is here till the end of time, so those vehicles are there for individuals to use. There is a few more. I think I've got 5 minutes. According to any of the four madhabs, are husbands obligated to pay for their wives' medical expenses? SubhanAllah. Not that I have. Okay. Not that I have heard of. Okay. Not that I have heard of that there is a requirement to pay. That requirement to pay. You got me reading that and this at the same time. Oh, and is obligated to pay. Too much pay. Okay. Right. I'll look into that, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan. Just send me a message, please, Usman, so that I have it on there so that I can action that, inshallah. According to any of the four madhab, so it's medical expenses tend not to come under the requirement of obligations because seeking medical intervention is not obligatory. However, if the wife is completely under the responsibility of the husband and she has no means to any other medical support, then yes, he would cover that cost for her. How can one strengthen their relationship with Allah in times of spiritual doubt or hardship? Well, there is a reason for the spiritual doubt. The spiritual doubt has come due to lack of providing enough ritual acts to the soul. Ritual acts to the soul are what gets a person spiritually strong. And if there are no ritual acts to the soul, then they become spiritually weak. That is the issue. Okay. And so one needs to be doing more ritual acts. The more ritual acts you do, the more your soul becomes strong. That is its training. You see, we want to put the car in front of the horse. We want to be spiritually strong, and then we're going to do ritual acts. Nah, wrong way around. Okay, wrong way around. You have to do ritual acts to become spiritually strong. It's the other way around. So you see many people, I'll go for Hajj when I'm spiritually ready, or I'll keep a beard when I'm spiritually ready, or I'll pray regularly when I'm spiritually ready, or I'll recite more Quran when I'm spiritually ready, or I'll do more Nawafil when I'm spiritually ready. No, it's the wrong way around. You have to do ritual acts in order to become spiritual. If you didn't need to do, if there was no need for you, if there was another way to become spiritually strong, why would Allah command ritual acts? Why is he commanding ritual acts? The hadith makes it quite clear that, praying 5 times a day is like taking ghusl from a stream outside of your door 5 times a day. What is it saying? It's saying this is cleansing your soul. Like the way water cleanses clothes, this is cleansing your soul. So therefore, ritual acts are what makes a person pious, okay, spiritually strong. So one has to do more. I think that covers the lot, alhamdulillah. So as I look into... No, it's not olivelantratrust.co.uk, olivelantratrust.com. Okay, olivelantratrust.com, gentlemen. Let me quickly see if it's, I'll check it. Ustadji always needs to check things, doesn't it? www.olivelantratrust.com. It's dead for some reason. Right, the domain name has expired. Right, that's my task for this evening, inshallah. Anyway, jazakallah khair, gentlemen and ladies. Till inshallah the next time. Quite a long and lengthy fiqh hour. I think we finally made the hour mark after a long time, thanks to one particular person in particular. Names won't be mentioned, and of course the others who came on as well, alhamdulillah. As is by practice, where there's a need, obviously I'll pop in. When there's more questions, then I'll do that. Yes, more than happy to do that, Hamza. The only thing is, obviously, is that my time is quite precious to me. And if there's no questions, then there's no point me coming on here and just sitting here looking at my beautiful face on the camera. What's the maqsad? So I need questions, you see. So if you put the questions up on the Markaz al-Ifta wal Qāḍī groups, then I will see the questions and I will see them pile up. And when I see them pile up, I'll think, okay, I've got about 10, 15 questions. Let me do a fiqh hour. But if I don't see anything pile up, then, I'm thinking, well, okay, alhamdulillah, the brothers and sisters are happily doing their ibadat. They don't need me to do that. So what's the point coming on? It's really that simple, inshallah. So again, I waited for the hour mark. We have now got to the hour mark. Jazakumullah khairan. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.